Welcome to the RPG Players Guild. My name is Gordon Jackson, and today we're going to be talking about Monstrous adventures. And I want to talk about a lot of the races. I'm doing a series of videos on races for Dungeons and Dragons 5e, and when we talk about some of the races that in the past have been, only considered monsters, and now they're a playable race, and how we incorporate them in the game, and what kind of stereotypes and what kind of impression we have when we come into the game, and really kind of working it out. I've shot this video I don't know how many times, trying to communicate across exactly my thought process on these types of playable races. So let's look at what the game has and kind of get down into it. So when they talk about monstrous adventures, in some campaigns, humanoids, normally regarded as sinister threats, can emerge to adventure alongside humans and the other standard races. This section is aimed at DMs who wish to expand the race selections for their campaigns beyond the typical folk of D&D. Why a monstrous character? Creating a character as creatures normally cast as villains offers up some interesting role-playing possibilities. Whether played for comedy, as a tragic story of betrayal and loss, or as an anti-hero, a monstrous character gives a player a chance to take an unusual challenge in the campaign. Before allowing monstrous characters in your campaign, consider the following three questions. Are monstrous creatures races going to be rare or mundane? So consider how an orc, goblin, or similar adventurer in your setting. Are they regarded as no stranger than elves or dwarves? Are they met with suspicion? The role these races play in your setting should determine the kinds of reactions that such characters meet. Don't be afraid to push the limit or push things to an extreme. An orc character might have to venture into town in disguise or remain in the wilderness for fear of imprisonment or mob violence. Be sure to talk to your group about how such characters can expect the world to treat them. Some players like the challenge of taking on an outcast, but don't set up one expectation and deliver another. You can establish a monstrous creature as just another culture in your campaign, one that has alliances and rivalries with humans, elves, and dwarves. A hobgoblin kingdom might serve as a buffer between a human kingdom and a blighted region overrun by the spawn of Chris. Kobolds might be city builders, the architects of grand, heavily fortified edifices, which other folk dwell in for a price. The cultural notes in chapter 1 are the standard D&D depiction of these creatures, but by no means do they define them for your campaign. And that's a real important sentence right there. So the way D&D depicts these creatures or these races, by no means do they define them in your campaign. Use them as a starting point for your own ideas. Second question, outcast or ambassador. Consider how a monstrous character's native culture views the character. And is the character an outcast, a spy, an ambassador, or something else? Work with your player to determine how the character ended up as an adventurer. The character's bond is a great starting point to consider for this question. How did the bond drive the character to adventure? The character's trait, flaw, and ideal can play a role in fleshing out the story. Friends or enemies. Figure out what special ties the character has to other members of the adventuring party. And I'm going to stop right there. So I went and pulled out my original copy of the Monster Manual. Now, I have a first edition, first printing of the Monster Manual, and I didn't go out and buy that special. I bought it when it came out because I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons that long. And I will tell you that as a player, I have in my house right now, I have a library that has somewhere between 1,000, 1,500 sci-fi and fantasy books. Probably split about 50-50, maybe a little bit more fantasy than science fiction. And in shooting the video and starting yesterday, I went through my library and was looking at the books that I have in there. And the very first real books that I ever read, and my story's not uncommon, it was The Hobbit and The Fellowship of the Ring. And so that colored my perception of orcs and goblins and trolls and wargs and some of these other races. And looking through the books that I have, with only a few exceptions, those races have all been portrayed that way. And so if that's the only thing you look at based off of that, then you're going to have this perception that every time you run into an orc, the only good orc is a dead orc, because that's the way it is. But looking at the monster manual, the first monster manual, halflings were in the monster manual. They're considered a monster. Now, I will tell you that there is one monster that I have not been able to find in any of the monster manuals that have come out. And I've done a bunch of research on this particular monster. And this particular monster is a sentient creature. They are the most brutal, the most devious, sinister, backstabbing, conniving, ruthless creature that I've ever run across. In the right circumstances, they will eat their own. They will sacrifice their own to some deity who may or may not even give them anything. They are brutal. They will ravage lands to gain access to an ancient forest for the sole purpose of burning that forest to the ground. And every other species and every other race that I've ever talked to, they tell their children campsite stories about this particular race to scare the dickens out of them. And I've never been able to find them. Even going back to the original monster manual, I do not see them on here. And they should fit somewhere right in between these two right here. And that race is humans. So when we talk about monsters, I mean, think about it. I mean, step back and just think about what humans are capable of. Humans will kill each other just based off of the color of their skin or what country they come from. They are brutal. They are, I would, in my worst envisionings of some of these races based off of books that I've read, orcs, goblins, they are not nearly as cruel as humans. So, I mean, the only way we're going to really get past some of the stuff with the races is to quit calling things monsters. They're hobgoblins, they're bugbears, they're goblins, they're orcs. They have a culture. And one of the things I really like about D&D is that we can come to the table and we should try and leave that stuff behind and really think about it, and open our minds to use our imaginations. When we look at this, there was a day, sometime in the past, where there was no such thing as a halfling. There was no such thing as a dwarf. There was no such thing as an elf. There was no such thing as an orc. Okay? Nobody had ever heard of that word before. Nobody knew anything. Somebody, talking about the real world, somebody used their imagination and developed something about them. They developed a backstory. They developed a history. They made them a permanent antagonist, or they made them always the bad guy. Right? And this is from this species right here's perspective. And as I said just a minute ago, there's no species out there, or there's no race out there that's more, I mean, like, really, if you wanted to start with Monster Manual, this right here should be the picture on the front cover. And it should be the very first one. Like, hey, of all of the monsters that are in this manual, this is the one that you have to worry about the most. Because this one right here hunts every single thing in here. And they go out of their way to do it. Even if it serves no valid purpose. Just for the heck of it, they'll come hunt you. Okay? So thinking about, like, when we're doing D&D, and I know we're doing a video on monstrous races, or what is called Monstrous races, but I want to talk for 1 second about the rules. I am not a rules lawyer, and I will say this thousands of times. I am not a rules lawyer. I've been playing for over 40 years, and I still have not read all the books. I still don't know all of the rules. A new edition comes out, and I still don't know all the rules. I still don't know all the rules in 5e, and we figure them. We learn them as we go along. Okay, I'm not ever going to be a rules lawyer. I'm always trying to use my imagination and trying to be a great player and trying to fit into the group and trying to help out my DM to push the narrative and try and make great adventures and trying to be that, because I look at D&D where we're in groups, we're like superheroes. We're the X-Men, we're the Avengers, and we're out there we're the heroes of the party. Okay? And really trying to push that stuff. I like rules because there is a 4-letter word in Dungeons and Dragons, and it's called, let me see if I can spell this out. Let me see if I can get this right. It's called home brew. Okay? And a lot of people look at that as a 4-letter word. It's actually 2 words, and they're both 4 letters, but it's a lot of people look at home brew. And I will tell you something about homebrew is the second that you change anything, that's homebrew. That's D&D. What I like about D&D is that we have some stuff where you go, well, my character attacks you and I win. Well, how do we know we win? We need to roll some dice. What are your stats? We have this stuff so that when we're in combat or we're in this situation, we have things where we can roll the dice to see if we make that perception check or see if we survive that poison. And we have these rules, and I like to follow those rules, because if everything we're doing is homebrew, then we're not playing D&D. But that being said, the stats that we get for a certain race are the stats that we get for that race. We want to play within those bounds. But backstory or the history of that race in your campaign, especially if you're a DM and you're world building, you don't have to come up with it. Just like somebody came up with orc one day, you come up with orc today, and this is how your orcs play. How diverse is your society? Now, this isn't to say that like everybody gets along, because we know that that's not how it works. And if it was just citizens, in most cases, we would all just get along. Because what do we want to do? We want to do our work and have food and be able to enjoy life and walk around and have some peace and quiet and not be, every time we walk through the woods being accosted by. But we aren't governments, aristocrats, these kings. They have different motivations than the average citizen that's walking around. The average citizen's like, why are we attacking them? I mean, but for whatever reason, the king of the land decided that they're going to do it. So it's not like you have to have in your world everybody gets along. But I really am excited about trying to open up my own mind when you start thinking about playing an orc, how you can play them. They aren't always bloodthirsty, vicious. Are they sometimes? Absolutely. Are humans sometimes? Absolutely. So trying to think of, how diverse is your world building and how diverse is the area that you're at. Maybe the area that your characters and your players are at and may have 3 or 4 different nations that are in that area, and maybe some of these races are a little bit uncommon. But if you go over to another island, you take that 5-day boat trip and you go over to that other island is, it's hobgoblins, goblins, and bugbears. And maybe that other island has got other species on it, or other races. Maybe there's parts of our land where there's not big communities, but hey, the Furbolgs, they take care of our ancient forests here. We use them for our national forests, and they're the peacekeepers that make sure that the national forests stay right. There's all kinds of things that you can do, but trying to stick within the bounds of having set stats. But then we can adjust the lore. So we have stats, and we try and stick with those, and that's because you get a new player in your game. And they go, hey, I want to play a bugbear. Well, guess what? We play bugbears based off of these stats. Okay? But just for your general knowledge, the lore is different. So this is how we play bugbears here, and this is where you see them. And it's not uncommon to be walking around the city and see a bugbear. Okay? They've been depicted like that. I will say that probably, like you've talked about how different races have been depicted, probably the most sinister, like talking about goblins, the most sinister depiction of goblins, I think, of all time is probably in Harry Potter. I mean, they're bankers. I mean, they're in control of our money. That's scary. So let's talk. Let's talk about Tasha's. So Tasha's does some stuff to really try and open this up a little bit, so that in the past, if DMs wanted to do some of this stuff, people would go, well, that's just homebrewing it. So Tasha's has kind of addressed that with the customizing your origin. So it's done a few things. Number one, you can take ability scores, for known races, and instead of every time you're a dwarf and you get your +2 in con, you can now put that +2 somewhere else, because not every dwarf is a shield bearing, popped out of the womb, and they already had an axe. It's like, they're not in dwarf society. They're not curious as to what sex the dwarf's going to be. They're curious, and they're betting on what kind of axe they're going to pop out with. Okay, that's not every dwarf is born with an axe in their hand. So being able to put that +2 in a different stat other than con, because that dwarf is a druid, or that dwarf is a monk, or that dwarf is a cleric, and maybe their focus has always been their life in something else where that +2 will help. So I really, really like the Tasha's rules for the character options, being able to, because it opens the door for you to play these characters in different ways than what we've traditionally thought. They also have here where you can customize your lineage. And it gives you the ability here to, instead of choosing one of the game's races for your character at first level, you can use the following traits to represent your character's lineage, giving you full control over how your character's origins shape them. What I like about this is, as a DM, you can take a race and you can create sub-races using this right here to expand on that race, because maybe in your society maybe on your map and in your world, you may run into anybody. You may go into the orc nation, but you may run into an orc in the elf nation. And being able to really kind of expand your game by telling the player, hey, yeah, we've got all of the races that are in there, but if you're playing an orc, like, hey, you want to play an orc? We have 2 sub races that we've created based off of these rules right here, so that you can really expand that and really think outside. And I really don't know if it's thinking outside the box. I think it's just opening up your mind, because we come into this with certain ideas, stereotypes, racism, whatever. And I really think that in this game, which is all about using your imagination, that we should be better than that. Now, in prepping for this video, I saw a lot of stuff online where people are really upset about, we knew that this was coming, that they were going to do something about customizing your origin, and people were really upset that they didn't take it far enough. They didn't, change some of that. And I will tell you that this right here, just these 2 pages, give us, the player, and the DM the ability to make those changes. It's not all up to Dungeons and Dragons and Wizards of the Coast to make this change. It's us as players and DMs to be able to look at that and change the way that we play our game, so that we're looking at all of the races on an equal standing and not having some predetermined thing of, well, when you're doing that. And it really opens it up, because think about Star Wars, when you go into the bar and you see all these different races that are in there, and some of them, we see the adventurers, the ones that are in the bar on Tatooine. These people aren't on their home planet. Who knows what the society's like on their home planet? These are the ones that are out adventuring. So we're seeing a lot that are bounty hunters and thieves and smugglers. They're in a spaceport. So we're seeing a lot of those, but that's not everybody in their race. One of the things about Dungeons and Dragons that changes the whole deal, and you really gotta, I think, kind of maybe step back, is we have magic. And in the real world, they say God created everyone, but Colt made everyone equal. So Colt pistols, right? Well, if God created everyone, magic made it all equal. So magic is a big deal, and how that affects all the stuff that goes around there. So we can look at having more integration with these races that would be considered monstrous. I think the only way we're going to get past that is if we quit thinking of trolls as monsters and start thinking of trolls as trolls. Now, I can tell you, if you owned a bar, wouldn't you like to have a troll as your bouncer? I mean, that'd be a great deal, right? So I think we can do there's so much stuff that we can do with these and I'm just as bad as everybody else, I guess. I really got to open up your mind and really start looking at these races as opposed to looking at bugbears as a monstrous race. They're just a race. They're bugbears. Okay? I can guarantee you every bugbear out there, and here's the thing about bugbear. Bugbears came from, their little deal is boogeyman, bugbear, bugaboo. So let's look at, but do you see, I mean, look at that right there. I mean, we know Monsters, Inc. We know that in Monsters, Inc. that there was monsters that was in his culture that were totally evil. They wanted to eat your eyes for juju beads. But not all of them were like that. Some of them just had a job to do, right? But when it came down to it, they were actually pretty good guys. And I think we should be more open about playing these races and having fun with them. It doesn't always have to be where we're at combat with them. I have, in all the years that I've played D&D, thinking about it realistically, I have killed more humans than I have killed any other species, probably all other species combined, and races. I've probably encountered more humans that were trying to do wrong and killed them, or had conflict with humans, than I have with any other species that's out there. So it's not always that the goblins are the ones that are trying to steal your stuff. Maybe the goblins were just on their way home and you encountered them. And maybe you could start trading with them. I just spoke with a buddy of mine named Skylar. And I talk to him every morning, and we talk about the videos and where I'm at. And his group had left off where they had encountered a group of goblins. And he was talking about, like attack, like what they were going to do with them. And it was all about, like, are we, what our stuff is, whether or not we think we can take out all of them, or if this is going to cause us a big problem. And my first thought was, my character, who's in a different campaign, my first thought was, wow, are they like interested in trading? Are you like talking to them, or did they just immediately attack you? Because my character is a trader. He's building a Silk Road. I'm actually helping a dungeon master create a world, and we're trying to fill in some of the blanks. And my character is trying to build a trade route, and I'm trying to look for people along that trade route that I can trade with, and that I can either bring stuff to, or I can buy stuff from. And looking at it a little bit differently, I think it'll totally open up our games. And I really, it's like the Star Wars thing. You walk into the tavern in D&D and you've got 15 different races that are involved in the tavern. Could really open up the game, and you could have a lot of fun with it. So maybe we should quit thinking of them as monsters and start thinking of them as trolls. All right. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching the video. If you like the channel, hit subscribe. If you like the video, hit like. And if you hit the bell, you'll get notifications whenever new videos come out. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Be safe and have fun.